Fraction, decimal, percentage. Convert between the different forms to represent the same number. What are they? Fractions are equal parts of a whole or a collection. Decimals are numbers that have a decimal point followed by digits. Percentage is the same thing as number of parts out of 100. So why? Helps to convert between each one, since each one can help in a different way. Interesting fact, koala bears are not bears. They are marsupials. So let's take a look at the fraction, decimal, percentage chart. We're going to convert each one into the other two, and that represents the same number but in a different way. So let's go ahead and take a look at the first one. So we're going to convert that fraction into a decimal and percentage. So let's show a model of it. We have on the right hand side, we have one big square, and we have separated into 10 different rectangles that have the same area, and we have one of them shaded. Now let's go ahead and write it out. 1 over 10 is the same thing as 1/10, and we can use that place values to write down to our decimal. So we have 1 over 10, we have 1 in the tens place value, so therefore we can just write our decimal as 0.1. Now we're going to multiply our fraction by 10, so we're going to multiply the top and the bottom by 10. And why we're doing that, I'll show you why in a second. So 1 times 10 is 10, and 10 times 10 is 100. Now we have, the model has changed from 10 equal rectangles to 100 equal squares. Now why have we done that? Once again, let's take a look at the definition of percentage. Percentage is the number of parts per 100. So now we have 100 squares. Okay, but previously we had 10 rectangles. So now we can easier use the definition, and we can see that we have 10 squares shaded. So now we have 10 parts per 100. And instead of writing out the words, we can use the symbol. So we have 10% for our answer. Now we have converted each one. So now we can move on to example 2. So we have the decimal, convert the fraction, convert it into a fraction and into a percentage. So let's take a look at the model. Now why do we have 4 parts shaded? Well, let's take a look at the place value. So we have the units, tenths, and hundredths. So we have 4 hundredths is the name. So we can shade 4, and then the 100 tells us how many squares we need. So then we can use the percentage definition to help us with define the percentage. Number of parts per 100. Well, we have 4 parts. So we have 4 parts per 100. Then we can just go ahead and write out the symbol instead of the words. And we're going to use that 4 parts per 100 to write our fraction. And now we're not done, because 4 over 100 can be simplified. Why? Because 4 and 100 share a factor of 4. But if you don't see that and you see 2, then you have to do it again. Not a big deal. So if we change 4, we divide 4 divided by 4, and 100 divided by 4, we get 1 over 25. Now, as you can see, our model has changed. Instead of having 100 equal squares, we have 25 equal squares and rectangles. So it's the same thing, because in each square or rectangle is an area of 4. So it's a little bit different, but it's still the same representation of 4 over 100. Now, let's take a look at example 3. We need to convert that percentage into a fraction and decimal. So let's go ahead and get started by writing the model and the number. And then, so therefore, let's take a look at the definition of percentage. Number of parts per 100. So we can just go ahead and write 53 parts per 100. And using that parts per 100, we can write our fraction, 53 over 100. Now, we don't have to simplify that one, because they don't share a factor. The only factor they share is 1, so you don't need to do anything. So then we can then go ahead and then divide those two numbers to get our decimal. So let's go ahead and write out our number, and then we're going to move 1 decimal to the left and 1 more. Why have we done 2? Well, because there's 2 zeros in 100. We move it to the left 2 times, and we have our answer is 0.53 or 53 hundredths. Now let's take a look at example 4. We have the decimal. We're going to convert it into a fraction and a percentage. So let's go ahead and write down our number with the model. So now we can go ahead and write our place values, so that we can then see why there is 45 squares shaded. So as you can see, hundredths is the last place value, so therefore we need to have 100 squares, and we need to shade it 45 because the number is 45 hundredths. So then we can take a look at our percentage and the definition, number of parts per 100. And then we can do how many parts. There's 45 shaded, so 45 parts per 100. Who wants to write down the words when you can just write the symbol? So 45%. And then we can use the 45 parts per 100 to write our fraction. And as you can see, there's an OR, so that means we have to simplify. How do you know? Well, because it ends in a 5 and a 0, our two numbers do. So therefore, we need to divide both of those numbers by 5. And 45 divided by 5 and 100 divided by 5 is 9/20. And as you can see, our model has changed. Instead of having 100 equal squares, we now have 20 equal rectangles with 9 of them shaded. So let's take a look at example 5. So we need to convert that fraction into a decimal and percentage. Well, let's use the 25 out of 100. Why? Because it'll be easier to convert into a decimal and a percentage. Well, we have 25 squares shaded out of 100. So let's take a look on how we got 1/4. So we're going to divide the top and bottom both by 25. So 25 divided by 25 and 100 divided by 25 is 1/4, or 1/4. So as you can see, the model has changed into 4 equal shapes. They all have the same area. And now we're going to convert it back into the other way with 100 squares. So it's easier to see to convert to a decimal and percentage. And now we're going to write down the definition of percentage, number of parts per 100. Well, we already have it shaded, and we can just look at the numerator as well. So we have 25 parts per 100. Instead of writing out the word, let's use the symbol, 25%. And now we can then write out the place value because we know it's 25 parts per 100, or 25 hundredths. Okay, and now we can take a look at example 6. We have 22%, and we need to convert that into a fraction and a decimal. So let's go ahead and write down the number with the model. We have 22 shaded and out of 100. So write down the definition of percentage, number of parts per 100. And now we can just write down 22 parts per 100. We can use that to either do the fraction or do the decimal first. It's up to you. Okay, we're going to do the decimal first. So 22 divided by 100, which is going to be 22.0. Now we're going to move it to the left. By it, I mean the decimal, and move it one more place to value to the left, and we get 0.22, or 22 hundredths. Now we can just write our fraction 22/100 from the 22 parts per 100. And as you can see, we have an OR. We have to simplify this because they share a factor of 2. And then we can divide 22 divided by 2 and 100 divided by 2, which is 11/50. And as you can see, the model has changed. Instead of having 100 equal squares, we now have 50 equal rectangles with 11 of them shaded. Now, here's the full chart, just in case you wanted to look at it. And now it's going to be your turn. So go ahead and pause the video so you can take your time to answer these questions. And I'm going to show you the answers in 3, 2, and 1. Here are the answers. If you got them correct, well done. If you didn't, there's always tomorrow.